Concept, consent drawings, consent processing. I used to tell people if everything went to plan, you could do that in a 3-month process. If you have a delay, it might be a couple of weeks, not a couple of months or half a year. I reckon it's like 50 to 100% slower. We're now going from what used to be a 3-month process to a 6 to 7 month process. You want an assessment of environmental effects on the screen, Sam? Website it is. Right, how cool is that build? Man, I'd like to live in that house. So back in 2019, I did a video on build consent process. While the process is the same, the timelines that I gave you then and now are so different. It is insane how long it's taking to move a consent through all the various parts of the process. It is taking a lot of time. And also, I made that video back when I only had 500 subscribers. Now almost another 3,500 have joined since then. So why don't I do build consent process 2021 updated? That's me. I'm Josh. I'm a qualified builder here in New Zealand. So I'm still a qualified builder here in New Zealand. I haven't left since COVID. So that part's still correct. So if you haven't watched my last video and you've had your head in the sand in the build world, what have I said in here? The building consent is the foundation document for any significant building project. Here's the official answer. A building consent is written approval to carry out site-specific work in accordance with the plans and standards. Basically, we're putting together a bunch of details to prove to a local council, that's a key point, and here in Wellington we're working with 4 different local councils. I've got a build that I'm dealing with Wellington Council, Porirua Council, Lower Hutt Council and Upper Hutt Council. Although the consenting process is theoretically the same, each council is slightly unique in how they approach the process and what they're picky about. But basically the consent is a set of plans telling the local council how we're going to comply with the building regulations. I think it's really important to touch on the fact that we only need 90 more subscribers to crack 4K. So this is the perfect time for you to go ahead and click subscribe if you haven't already. And if you haven't already and you're watching multiple videos, I don't know why you haven't clicked subscribe. I wonder if people do that. They click subscribe and then they unsubscribe unwillingly. In order to talk about the building consent, we need to do a brief overview of the system. Here in New Zealand, we are ruled by a government, and currently Jacinda is the boss. Well, she's kind of the boss. MB is in charge of creating and monitoring the rules, the building code. It's then up to the local councils, such as Upper Hutt, to make sure that your build is following the rules. So back when I first started my channel in 2019, real early on my channel, you saw me doing a house in Upper Hutt. So I purchased the property, I put the offer in December, I purchased the property in January, and by April, we already had a roof on. Concept, consent drawings, consent processing. I used to tell people if everything went to plan, you could do that in a 3-month process. If you have a delay, it might be a couple of weeks, not a couple of months or half a year. So since then, we've had a number of changes in the industry. Number one, COVID hit a year and a half ago. You know about that. And so you obviously probably know the impact that's had on us here in New Zealand. People haven't left New Zealand, and if anything, more people have come back to New Zealand. So that brings us to problem number 2. The number of consents being processed has gone up. From memory, I'll put the actual facts on the screen, but back then we were processing about 32,000 consents a year, and right now I believe it's about 39 to 40,000 consents a year. Using those real rough numbers, it's about 25% more builds are happening, but there hasn't been 25% more resources chucked at the whole market. Essentially, the same amount of people from the council and the designers and the builders are doing 25% more work. I reckon it's like 50 to 100% slower is my feeling on it. And so generally I'd say from sign off concept, it used to be pretty good that you could say in 3 months we'll be good to go. We're now double that, and it's been 6 months, pushing 7 months before we get a consent. The processing time, and this is not just, don't get me wrong, this is not just the councils. I think one thing we've got to establish is the amount of people involved in the consent process. So we've got to have a signed off concept, and then we've got to book it in with our designer to start the consent drawings, and then the designer needs to send it to consultants such as an engineer for a soil test and foundation design, and they need to send it to truss design. And if we're working in our rural lots, we also need a septic design, just to name a few. On some sites we also need wind reports and other fun stuff like that. Then the consultants give all the information back to the designer, then the designer turns that into a set of consent drawings. Then the consent drawings get submitted to the council. Right now, the council is even delaying accepting the submission, and then they are taking about 6 to 7 weeks to process the consent. Add to that, there's a delay in booking in the designer, and there's a delay in booking in each person. So if you add up not just the time it's taking the guys, but the delays in booking up the people, we're now going from what used to be a 3-month process to a 6 to 7 month process. And that means if you say to me, go on your build right now, basically, I won't be able to do anything on site until February, March next year at the earliest, if we don't work together to streamline the process. So what I'm going to be doing over the next coming weeks is working with my upcoming clients to lock in their specifications, lock in their design, engage the right people, book in everything, and move those plans through the process as efficiently as we can. You know, back then, here was my rough guideline for the process. Disclaimer, this is based on my area and my experience. Yours may differ. There are things we can do to work with you to push that along. Basically, the biggest thing now is doing as much thinking ahead and as much planning and locking stuff in, because every little change tweaks that process a little bit more as well.